They were never meant to be found.
Every grave hides a story.
Some stories should stay buried.
You ever wake up and something feels wrong? Not wrong exactly, just off. The world has shifted slightly while you slept, shadows bending at strange angles, the air tasting faintly metallic, heavy, alive. That's the feeling Martha Hollings woke to one late October night in 1887. A chill crawled up her spine, whispering of something lurking just beyond the edge of her perception. Something patient, deliberate, waiting. Ashmont Ridge was a tiny settlement in the mountains of western Virginia, so remote that the mail arrived only twice a month, and even then only if the weather was kind. The ridge itself stretched like a long winding serpent of rock and pine for 12 miles. The town, a scattering of mud-slick buildings along a winding main road, was barely a town at all. There was a general store with a false front to appear grander than it was, a church whose steeple leaned slightly east as if straining to hear distant whispers, and a boarding house exuding the mingled scent of boiled cabbage and lamp oil. At the far end of the ridge, a white-painted house stood alone. Martha Hollings's home. Martha was striking, not delicately so, but tall, nearly 6 feet, with dark hair pulled so tightly it looked painful, slate-gray eyes that seemed to cut through fog and shadow, and hands that never paused, never rested, trained from years of meticulous work. She had once been a renowned seamstress, capable of feeling fabric and envisioning the final garment before cutting a single thread. Her husband Roland, a broad-shouldered logger, had built the house with her, felling the trees, crafting the beams, placing every window to catch the morning sun. Their home was precise, orderly, a fortress at the edge of the forest. But Roland had been gone for 4 years, claimed by a logging accident. A dead branch, hanging precariously high, had fallen without warning, striking him across the skull. One moment alive, the next gone. She buried him under a simple granite marker with only his name and dates. Alone now, Martha maintained the garden, tended chickens, took in sewing work, traded produce for flour and lamp oil. The townspeople mostly left her be, but that peace would soon shatter. It started subtly. 3 nights past mid-October, Martha was awakened by a sound. Scraping, metallic, deliberate. Not the usual rustle of branches, not wind teasing a loose shutter. This was purposeful, slow, rhythmic, intentional. Barefoot, she crept to the window, the cold boards biting her toes. The moon, 3/4 full, revealed an empty yard, yet the rhythm persisted. Scrape, pause, scrape, like a whispered threat through the night air. Morning revealed the first tangible signs. Marks gouged deep into the siding, horizontal, smooth, like metal dragged along the surface with precision. The clothesline, once taut, was severed. Sheets scattered across the dew. A water bucket, used daily, was found 100 yards away on a stump, upright as if carefully placed. Someone or something was preparing her. She spoke with Silas Pembroke, the general store owner. Others had noticed disturbances. Missing tools, vanished livestock, fences torn from their posts. Clara Jennings, a widow, claimed to see a figure standing at the edge of her property for 3 nights in a row. Silent, motionless, always at dusk or dawn. One night, she fired a warning shot with her husband's old Springfield. The figure didn't move. Martha didn't sleep that night. She kept Roland's hunting knife close, the house bathed in lamplight. Every settling board, every whisper of wind, set her nerves on edge. Around 2:30, the steps came again, slow, measured, deliberate. Floorboards creaked with purpose, each sound echoing like a heartbeat in the empty house. The scraping resumed, moving from corner to corner, deliberate, testing. She raised the rifle, knuckles white, trembling. The scraping stopped. Then the door handle rattled, metal on metal, twisting unnaturally. Her throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to run. But she stood her ground. The handle turned again. Breathing, rasping, wrong, like air being forced through a body not meant to breathe. Spilled through the thin wood. And then, a voice, layered, wrong. Each syllable a dozen tones at once. Martha Hollings. She understood. She was no longer just being watched. She was the target. Over the following weeks, Ashmont Ridge descended into chaos. Barn doors were ripped from their hinges with inhuman force. Wells were fouled, declared unusable. Families vanished overnight, wagons packed and gone by morning. Animals refused to cross invisible lines. Horses balked at the bridge. Dogs whimpered and retreated. Sightings of the figure increased. Tall, impossibly tall, some 7 or 8 feet. Others hunched, malformed. And every observer described the same feeling, wrongness. A violation of natural law, a horror the mind could not comprehend. Martha, keenly observant, noticed patterns. The figure appeared repeatedly, always at night, always when she was alone. It watched, studied, isolated her. She saw it herself one late November afternoon. A dark silhouette between 2 pines, 100 yards distant. Its proportions were grotesque. Limbs too long, head tilted at impossible angles. But she did not run. Instead, she bent, picked up her spade, and moved deliberately, unhurried, toward the house, refusing to let the thing know she was afraid. Later that night, after midnight, a sound echoed through the ridges. Not a scream, not a howl, but a sound that rose and fell in rhythm, a broken attempt at speech. Townsfolk barricaded doors, gripped weapons, and waited. At sunrise, an emergency church meeting revealed the grim truth. Sheriff Thomas Grady admitted helplessness. Ezra Voss, a hermit from North Ridge, confirmed that the town's terror was a repeat of history. 44 years prior, a woman named Elizabeth Carmichael had vanished under similar circumstances. Events repeated in cycles, escalating, culminating in disappearance. Martha realized she was being prepared, tested, conditioned. She would not run. She would confront, she would survive. Over the next days, she prepared. Rope, matches, her knife, hunting rifle, ammunition. Letters were left behind explaining her intent. On November 10, 1887, she walked into the woods for the confrontation. She carried determination, moving toward the clearing where footprints had mysteriously ended weeks before. The underbrush clawed at her hands and skirt, the air cold enough to burn her lungs. The moon cast long shadows across the ground, lantern in hand. By 10 p.m., she reached the clearing. A perfect circle, bare earth, a pile of objects at the center. Items missing from the town. Tools, shoes, scraps of fabric, stacked like a shrine. Then she heard it. A step behind her, deliberate, slow, measured. A towering figure emerged, 7 feet or more, thin, elongated, limbs grotesque, faceless, its attention pressed like a weight on her chest. Martha raised Roland's knife. She held her ground. She was ready. Martha stood in the clearing, her grip tight on Roland's knife, every fiber of her being alert. The faceless figure, impossibly tall, limbs elongated and unnerving, paused before her. It didn't move in the way humans do, no nervous shifting, no twitching. Just stillness, as if the air around it itself had hardened, molding to its presence. Martha felt the weight of those eyes that weren't there, the scrutiny pressing down like a heavy fog. She took a slow, deliberate step forward. The knife glinted faintly in the moonlight, catching its attention. The figure tilted its head, a subtle motion, studying her in silence. Martha's breath fogged in the cold night air, but her heartbeat was steady. She had rehearsed this confrontation in her mind for days, imagining every step, every decision, every possible reaction. She was ready. Then she stepped again. Closer. The figure remained still. Her feet crushed dead leaves underfoot, the only sound in the quiet night. With each step, she poured everything into her resolve. Memories of Roland, their home, their life together, and the grief she had carried for 4 lonely years. Anger, loss, frustration, every ounce of human emotion became armor and weapon simultaneously. Finally, she was within reach. She extended her hand, knife still in her grip, and touched the surface of its chest. The bark-like texture shifted beneath her fingers, breathing slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if alive. The figure shuddered subtly. Martha understood immediately. It existed in the space between realities, feeding off isolation and fear. It had chosen her because she was alone. But now she would define the terms. The darkness around her pulsed and warped. She was no longer in the clearing but suspended in a void, endless and silent. The figure's presence was all around, smaller now, weaker, uncertain. And Martha realized something profound. It didn't understand human connection. It had forgotten touch, warmth, interaction. It had existed in a vacuum, consuming loneliness for centuries. She wasn't afraid. She was compassionate, steady, and resolute. Her touch was deliberate, slow, but filled with all of her humanity. Every memory of Roland, the quiet evenings on the porch, the laughter, the shared meals, the comfort of their partnership, poured into her. But also the pain, the emptiness, the suffocating grief of loss. She gave it everything she was, every human emotion she had felt, every ounce of strength she had built over a lifetime. The figure let out a sound. A scream? A wail? It was more than either. A layering of anguish and confusion. A noise born from centuries of isolation. The void around Martha seemed to shatter, darkness exploding into fragments, black shards flying across the infinite emptiness. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, she was back in the clearing, knees sinking into the cold dirt. The figure was gone. The pile of objects, the tools, the scraps, the missing items, collapsed in on itself, falling to the earth as though gravity had returned. Martha remained kneeling for a long time, trying to collect herself. The oppressive weight that had lingered over Ashmont Ridge for weeks, the sense of unseen scrutiny, the tension pressing on the town, was gone. By dawn, when Martha made her way back to the town, the difference was palpable. Animals ventured again where they had balked. Dogs crossed paths they had refused. Horses traversed bridges without hesitation. Life cautiously resumed. People emerged from their homes, unsure, hesitant, but alive. The fear that had infected Ashmont Ridge for weeks was lifted, dissipating like mist in morning sunlight. Martha returned to the main street, torn and scratched from her journey, hair loose, clothing disheveled. Silas Pembroke stopped mid-motion behind the counter of the general store, his eyes wide in disbelief. "Martha, where have you been?" he asked, voice tight. She told him the entire account. The clearing, the pyramid of objects, the figure, the void, and the scream. Her voice was calm, flat, measured, as if reciting events from a ledger. Silas's face paled with every word. They sought out Sheriff Grady and Reverend Blackwood, along with Ezra Voss, the hermit who had first confirmed the history of these events. When Martha repeated the story, all three exchanged glances that carried the weight of unspoken understanding. Grady, a man of law and logic, shook his head. "This is beyond me. I deal with thieves, disputes, drunks, but this, I have no idea what to do." The town, meanwhile, had begun fracturing under the strain of fear. Families who could leave quietly packed wagons in the dead of night and disappeared, moving toward distant towns, leaving nothing but abandoned homes. Others fortified their homes, drew curtains, and waited, unsure whether to flee or confront. The church held nightly services, Reverend Blackwood's voice rising in fervent prayers for deliverance. But Martha wasn't interested in prayers. She had learned that the rules of engagement were different. She had confronted the darkness on her own terms and survived. Even in the following weeks, Ashmont Ridge remained changed. The townspeople, cautious but relieved, whispered about Martha's confrontation. Some suggested she had made a pact with the entity, others that she had somehow destroyed it through sheer will. Few spoke of the events openly, as if acknowledging them too fully would risk summoning them again. And Martha herself? She returned to her white house at the end of the ridge, continued her daily routines, her sewing, her gardening. But there was a subtle difference. Something in her eyes had shifted. She carried a knowledge, a calmness, a depth that made the townspeople uncomfortable, though they couldn't articulate why. Years later, after her death in 1923 at the age of 70, her journals were discovered. Meticulous, Precise handwriting chronicled daily life at first. But later volumes, beginning around 1900, grew stranger. Drawings appeared, hundreds of them, depicting the faceless figure at the edge of the trees, standing watch, waiting. Some included a smaller, human figure reaching out. Ashmont Ridge itself would vanish. The young people left during the Second World War to work in factories or fight overseas, never returning. Older residents died or moved away. By 1960, the forest had reclaimed the town. Foundations of buildings remained, stone steps of the general store, the remnants of the church and Martha's White House. Curious hikers or historians occasionally reported a sense of being watched, strange sounds, or glimpses of tall, unnatural shapes at the forest edge. Yet, for all the stories, the mystery remained. It wasn't just the figure, the disappearances, or the strange objects. It was the isolation, the connection between Martha and that incomprehensible presence. For a moment in that clearing, Martha and the figure were two solitary beings, recognizing each other across an infinite void. The darkness, the emptiness, the faceless watcher. All of it had a purpose, and she had met it, unafraid, on her own terms. Ashmont Ridge may have been reclaimed by the forest, its people dispersed, its town gone. But the stories, the warnings, the memory of what had occurred lived on. The faceless entity, whatever it was, had touched Martha, had tested her, had left, and perhaps waited. And Martha had survived. But the quiet knowledge of the mountains, the weight of the unseen, lingered, a reminder that some things cannot be explained, only endured. Martha stood in the clearing, her grip firm on Roland's knife, every sense sharp. The faceless figure, impossibly tall, limbs long and grotesque, did not move like a living thing. Its presence pressed down on her chest, a weight she could feel in her bones, icy and undeniable. Yet, she did not flinch. She had come prepared, mentally and emotionally, carrying every memory of her life, her grief, her love, and her determination. Step by deliberate step, she approached it. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of earth, decay, and something she couldn't name, something unnatural. When she was close enough, she touched it. Her fingers pressed against the bark-like surface of its chest. The world shifted. Suddenly, the clearing disappeared. There was no ground, no trees, no sky, just darkness stretching infinitely. The figure shrank, confused, uncertain. She realized it fed on isolation, on loneliness, on fear. It had chosen her because she had been alone. But now she was not afraid. She was present, fully herself, fully human, and fully alive. Her touch carried everything. The warmth and laughter of days with Roland, the quiet evenings on their porch, the grief of losing him, the frustration and loneliness of 4 long years. The figure screamed, a sound like nothing on earth, a cry of agony and confusion, a noise born from centuries of solitude. The darkness exploded, fragments of black flying in all directions, and then she was back in the clearing, on her knees, gasping but alive. The pile of objects, tools, shoes, fabrics, toys, collapsed around her, mundane items falling to the earth. The figure was gone. She stayed on her knees for a long time, collecting her breath, letting the silence settle. When she returned to Ashmont Ridge at dawn, the town seemed lighter. Animals ventured freely again. Dogs crossed old boundaries. Horses trotted across bridges. The oppressive fear that had gripped the town for weeks lifted like mist under the morning sun. Life resumed, cautiously, in Ashmont Ridge. Martha returned to her White House, continued her routines, her sewing, her gardening. But she was changed. There was a depth in her eyes, a weight of knowledge, a calm and confidence that unsettled those around her, though none could say why. Over the years, she chronicled her life in journals, carefully recording her observations and experiences. Drawings appeared later in her life, hundreds of images of a faceless figure at the forest's edge, watching, waiting, sometimes alongside a smaller human figure, reaching out. Ashmont Ridge itself would vanish. The young left for the Second World War, older residents died or moved. By 1960, the forest had reclaimed it. Foundations, stone steps, remnants of buildings remained, including Martha's house. Curious hikers and historians occasionally reported a feeling of being watched. Sounds that made no sense, glimpses of something that did not move quite right, something that watched until they left. Martha had survived, but she had changed. She had faced the incomprehensible and endured. In that brief connection with the faceless entity, she had understood something vital. Some things cannot be explained, only faced. She had been chosen, tested, and she had not broken. And in that, she had discovered her own strength, her own power, her own humanity. Some stories aren't meant to be fully understood. Some truths hide in the shadows between fear and courage. Martha Hollings walked into the darkness and met it, not with terror, but with determination. And maybe that is the lesson of Ashmont Ridge, that even when we are alone, even when the world feels against us, courage can carve a path through the unknown. So, the next time you feel watched in the woods, or the shadows linger just a little too long, remember Martha. Stand tall. Face the darkness. You may find, like she did, that the bravest thing isn't running. It's staying. Martha stood in the clearing, the pile of objects staring back at her under the dim silver light of the moon. The items weren't random. They were hers, or at least taken from the town. Tools, scraps of fabric, a small shoe, a child's doll, a hairbrush, arranged like offerings in a deliberate pyramid, as if the thing that had taken them had a twisted sense of ceremony. The air hung heavy, biting at her lungs, carrying the scent of damp earth, rot, and something chemical wrong. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she did not. Not yet. The steps came again, slow, patient. She could feel them before she heard them. The figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, thin, limbs too long, arms dangling past its knees, head tilted unnaturally. Its facelessness was what made her hands tremble. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, dark, unbroken skin. The presence pressed down on her chest. An invisible weight, like gravity itself, had thickened, tethering her in place. She raised Roland's hunting knife, the silver glinting faintly in the moonlight. Her pulse raced, but her resolve was absolute. "You wanted me. Here I am," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. The thing didn't respond. Its blank head tilted as if studying her, weighing her, understanding her in ways a human never could. Martha's mind raced. It had chosen her, isolated her, prepared her. All the missing tools, the severed clothesline, the scattered sheets, they were part of a process. The footsteps weren't chasing her. They were training her, conditioning her for whatever came next. And now she would take control. She would confront it on her terms. The figure moved closer, deliberately, each step measured. Martha tightened her grip on the knife, muscles coiled, eyes never leaving its featureless form. She stepped forward. It didn't flinch. She stepped again, closing the gap, feeling the wrongness radiate off it like heat from a fire, making her skin crawl. Yet, she did not retreat. She met it head on, refusing to let fear dictate her movements. Then she did the unthinkable. She reached out, hand steady despite the tremor in her chest, and touched it. Her fingers pressed against the bark like surface of its chest. It shivered beneath her touch, a pulse, a living presence, reacting to her. And then the world shifted. Suddenly, the clearing vanished. There was no ground, no trees, no sky, only darkness stretching infinitely in all directions. Martha could sense the figure, but here it was smaller, weaker, confused. She understood. It existed in the spaces between things, in the gaps where loneliness and isolation festered, feeding on the despair of those who had lost everything. It had chosen her because she was alone, because grief had already drawn her halfway into its world. But she was not afraid. Instead, she confronted it fully, mind and body. Every memory of Roland, every shared laugh, every quiet evening, every loss, every night spent in solitary grief. She poured it into that touch. She gave it everything that made her human, everything that made her Martha Hollings. The figure screamed. A sound the town had heard weeks before, but magnified, distorted, agonizing. It had forgotten what connection felt like, and now the touch burned through it like acid, shattering its darkness. The void around her exploded. Fragments of black tore through the infinite dark, and then she was back on her knees in the clearing. The figure was gone. The pile of objects collapsed, scattering into the dirt, mundane items tumbling as if gravity had resumed control. Martha stayed on the ground for a long time, catching her breath, processing what had happened. The silence of the mountains returned, oppressive yet familiar, and she rose slowly, legs shaking, heart still pounding. When she returned to town at first light, Ashmont Ridge seemed almost normal, the oppressive weight lifted. Animals ventured out again. Dogs crossed lines they had refused for weeks. Horses no longer balked at the bridge. Life resumed cautiously, as if the town itself exhaled. Martha's neighbors stared as she walked down the main street, torn and scratched, hair coming loose from her pins, dress ragged. Silas Pembroke stopped mid-motion, his mouth open in astonishment. "Martha, where have you been?" She told him everything, the clearing, the objects, the figure, its words. Her voice was flat, calm, like reading a ledger. Silas's face grew more troubled by the moment. "We need to tell the sheriff," he said. Together, they found Sheriff Grady with Reverend Blackwood and Ezra Voss. When Martha recounted the night, the three men exchanged glances tight with unspoken understanding. Grady's voice was hollow. "This is beyond me. I deal with lawbreakers, drunks, disputes. But this, I don't know what to do." Some townspeople wanted to leave immediately. Others argued for confrontation, for defense. Martha stood to the side, listening, but she felt a strange clarity. "You were chosen," echoed in her mind, the words the figure had spoken. Not randomly, not maliciously, but with purpose. She understood now. She was the target, and this confrontation was inevitable. She spent days preparing, cleaning her house meticulously, organizing her affairs, leaving letters explaining her intentions in case she didn't return. She cooked a proper meal, roast chicken, vegetables from her garden, savoring each bite. At dusk, she walked into the woods, carrying only Roland's knife. No rifle, no lantern, no heavy supplies. Only herself, her resolve, her memories. And then, she heard it. A single, deliberate footstep behind her. Martha froze, muscles taut. The figure emerged from the shadows, immense, faceless, limbs grotesque. Its presence pressed on her chest, oppressive and undeniable. She raised the knife, held it steady. The confrontation was at hand. Her heartbeat matched the deliberate rhythm of its steps. She did not falter. She would not give it satisfaction. This was her moment, the point where fear would no longer dictate her actions. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath, every shadow frozen, every leaf unmoving, waiting for what would come next.